Just 12 hours ago, and I really do mean just 12 hours ago, the Michigan Supreme Court postpones the trial from the Crumbley parents. It's all because starting tomorrow is the 1-year anniversary of that Oxford school shooting. Now, yesterday, we've heard that the ex-board members, especially the president, spoke out, telling their side of the story. And as we dug deeper into this, piles of evidence kept popping up. Lawsuits are alleging this and that. Then Ethan decided to plead guilty on all of those charges. Now they say that the shooting was preventable. Take a look at this.
I first want to address what was said in Sean's package, where the question was asked, where were these two board members? Because it's 2 days from the first anniversary, and we asked that question, and they said they were afraid to come forward. They were told not to come forward, but they wouldn't say by whom. Okay, so what's worse, the fact that there was a playbook and it wasn't used, or the fact that there was a playbook and it wasn't used, but the school board ostensibly is presenting to the public that they had everything under control, they did everything they could, and the shooting happened anyway? I asked the two former school board members those questions, and they said it's both and more. What makes these two former Oxford school board members potential flamethrowers aiming into an already burning hot pit is their claim that the Oxford School District had an approved playbook that, had it been followed, perhaps the actions of confessed killer Ethan Crumbley would have been seen, stopped, and therefore his shooting and killing of 4 students and injuring of 6 others might have been prevented.
Other markers, violent writings, drawings.
There is an actual playbook that the district adopted in 2004 called the Enhancing School Safety Using a Threat Assessment Model. It was issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. Secret Service. Now, according to Donnelly and Bailey, their attorney also says that the principal got external training on that playbook, but never passed that training along to others. They didn't even realize that playbook existed until February, 3 months after the shooting at Oxford High School.
I truly believe that if Oxford Community Schools had been prepared with Policy 8400 these past few years and had actually trained on threat assessment, the situation would have ended November 29th, and the 30th would have just been another day in Oxford.
That takes us to those disturbing drawings by Ethan Crumbley the day of the shooting, found by a teacher who reported them, that seemed to go ignored when it came to the very important piece of getting him and his backpack and that gun out of the school that morning, had proper procedures been followed. The attorney also says that teachers throughout the years have mentioned students with these behavioral markers and sounded alarms to no avail. And then there's the question of an independent third-party investigation that never happened because the district declined.
A bigger question might be, why is this even an option? Like Tom said, if a plane was to go down, Boeing doesn't come in and say, let's do this. The government comes in and says, we're going to do an investigation, tell you what went wrong. Why is it even an option for the school board? That should be mandatory. It should not even be an option.
Yes!
Okay, so the new school board president, Dan DeLisandro, released a written statement in part, and we'll put all of it on clickondetroit.com, but here's a part that we pulled out. He says, at Oxford Community Schools, the safety of our students and staff has remained our #1 priority. The third-party review of the events leading up to, during, and following November 30th, 2021, as reported at our last board meeting, has since seen increased participation of key stakeholders. The review will help us all understand the facts and have the transparency and accountability we all deserve. He never ever mentioned these two former board members holding a news conference, and I do want to point out, incidentally, that a review is not the same as a third-party independent investigation by the Attorney General's office. Guys, back to you.
Very good distinction to make, Paula. Transparency and accountability, that is what really everyone in that community wants.
Now here's my 2-minute take. I believe he's right. Yeah, I really do believe schools should not be given the option to do the investigation. They should be required to do so. It's mandatory. Just like the military, just like the Army did the program to help out the Army, to help out people who served during the 2003 Iraq War. It was a crime that just happened. It was a crime that happened where the three men murdered their wives because they didn't get that special training. So yes, I have to agree with the former president. The former president has said that it should be mandatory. Agreed. Or probably one of the board members. So, with the anniversary coming up in just one day, it could never have happened. It could never happen. The new president may say, well, we get what he's saying here, but we are not going to be doing that program. What we got to do it for all the other schools, and that's an issue. What kind of issue is there? It should be a law. If they do not act accordingly to this, then all of a sudden, we're back at square one. Auctioneering. Okay, coming up next, with the anniversary coming just tomorrow, the Michigan Supreme Court postpones the trial for the Crumbley parents. Stay with us. If you just joined us, we are continuing looking into the Oxford case. With the anniversary approaching tomorrow, there is now new details of what happened. Now remember, two of the former board members spoke at a news conference to detail what had happened. And it was under our noses the whole time. And it was under Michigan's noses the whole time and under my nose. It was that playbook that happened. Now, hadn't that principal trained on that playbook, none of this would have happened. None of it would have happened. Now, just 12 hours ago, the Michigan Supreme Court postpones the trial for the Crumbley parents. Why is that? Take a look.
Breaking news, we have developments in the Oxford High School shooting one day before the 1-year anniversary of this tragedy. The trial for the parents of the school shooter is being postponed. The state Supreme Court says that a lower court needs to hear an appeal from Jennifer and James Crumbley. The ruling came on the same day that Ethan Crumbley went before a judge again. Sean Lay is tracking both of these major developments, joining us now live at the Oakland County Courthouse in Pontiac with more on the why behind all of this.
Let's get right to it, Rhonda. We want to break all of this down for everyone. This is a huge development in the parents' case here of the Oxford school shooter. We'll show you some video. You're familiar by now with James and Jennifer Crumbley. They're facing involuntary manslaughter charges in the Oxford school shooting case. The year mark for that awful day is tomorrow. But today, just about 90 minutes ago, the Michigan Supreme Court drops a major bombshell. It's put the parents' case on hold. It is sending the case to the Michigan Court of Appeals to really see if there's enough evidence against the parents to actually send them on to trial. Now, a judge here in Oakland County already found that there was sufficient evidence, in her opinion, against the parents and bound them over for a trial. But like I said, 90 minutes ago, the Supreme Court just overruled them. The parents' trial now on hold as it goes to the Court of Appeals. Also happening today at 9 o'clock sharp here in the courts here in Oakland County. It was the monthly hearing for the Oxford school shooter. He also appeared on camera here via Zoom from the jail. The monthly hearing is simply to determine if the shooter will remain in the Oakland County jail where he is. He's a juvenile. He is 16. The judge ruled that he will remain in adult jail. The judge noted that this defendant has already pled guilty to all charges related to the Oxford school shooting. Sentencing expected for him sometime next year. Now, no comment from the Oakland County prosecutor about the parents' case being placed on hold. There is still a gag order. However, I've been speaking with parents of a couple of the victims from Oxford schools. In fact, just yesterday, Rhonda, we asked them about the parents' case. They have some extremely strong opinions, as you might expect, about the parents' case. We'll bring you their comments at Local 4 at 5 o'clock. But again, huge bombshell here from the Michigan Supreme Court day before the anniversary.
All right, Sean, we'll continue to monitor those developments and see your story later on today on the reaction from those parents. Thank you. A group made up of Oxford students and parents want to add every single child in the school district to a lawsuit. That group, Change for Oxford, it originally sued the district in April on behalf of 19 students. Now they want to make it a class action lawsuit. If that's approved by a judge, all Oxford students would become part of that suit. The group says the goal is to have a federal court order requiring the district to enforce and update safety procedures.
But if that were to happen, training, process of training, local law enforcement, even their own police department, like the one, like in CCISD and here in Flower Bluff. Now, if school districts were to have their own police department, nobody would be in this mess. So that's probably my take on this. And now, just yesterday, too, there are now new victims about this. The parents of the two victims are speaking out about the newest allegations from those two board members that happened yesterday. So let's take a look at this, and then we're going to take a break.
Surprised. It's more of the same. They drop the ball, they drop the ball, they drop the ball. I'm not surprised. It's more of the same. They dropped the ball, they dropped the ball, they dropped the ball, they covered it up.
Another blow for Jill Suave, whose 17-year-old son, Justin Schilling, was shot and killed in the bathroom at Oxford High School almost 1 year ago, sitting side by side with attorney Ven Johnson and parents that know how she's feeling, losing their son, Tate Meir.
Tater was a kind, loving soul. Loved making people laugh. Wanted to be everybody's friend.
This interview Monday was to remember these lives lost during a triggering time, the 1 year mark of the tragedy.
He lifted everybody up. He was the first to make you laugh. He celebrated all your victories. You know, he was my biggest supporter.
As they prepare for a devastating week ahead, more crushing news. With all of us, they learned this week school safety policies and procedures were never implemented at Oxford High School, according to two former school board members, including former president Tom Donnelly. Specifically, they said a step-by-step policy book never enacted that could have changed everything, especially to identify the shooter's potential threat risk.
There wasn't a team together to be able to make a decision on that kid when he went into the counseling office that day.
These parents agree regardless of what should have been in place. Common sense was not when the shooter was caught with a violent drawing the morning of the shooting, brought into the counselor's office, and sent back to class with the murder weapon in his backpack.
Common sense would have said that day, I'm going to look in the backpack. Could somebody have done that? How much more common sense level can you get? No, they handed it back to him. They gave the devil the keys to the kingdom. Here you go.
These families were gracious enough to talk with us for quite a while about what they've gone through the last year. We'll have much more to come from them on the anniversary this Wednesday. Jessica Dupnack, Fox 2 News.
And as well, on a special Give Me a Break Wednesday, Oxford, 1 year later. That's on Wednesday. Coming up next, Robert had his feeding tube taken out. But now the family wants it put back in. Who should decide? The doctors or a court of law? John Lawson with a conclusion to the story. And the big question, whose life is it anyway? Stay with us. Yesterday, I brought you the story of a young man named Robert who almost died of a drunk driving accident. His whole body was paralyzed, and there was a food tube inserted in him. What we know so far was that feeding tube was in him, mysteriously disappeared. And if that food tube was released, they could cut off the food and water. He was being non-responsive. The family says he can't die. He has a lot to live for. Remember, Robert was the father. But the other family members said, but the half family members say, over my dead body. So the question is, who should decide, and whose life is it anyway? Here's John Larson with the conclusion to our story.
When Robert's mother and two of his sisters heard of Rose's plan to withdraw Robert's feeding tube, they got busy making a case that Robert would want to live. They hired a lawyer and got a court order to keep Robert's feeding tube connected and alerted the media.
The Robert that I grew up with, that I knew, was a very stubborn, mule-headed person.
A fighter.
Yeah, he was.
He would go down fighting.
Yes.
He would not.
Despite the doctor's bleak prognosis that Robert would never significantly get better, his mother, Florence, and his half-sisters, Rebecca Vinson and Deborah Hofer, told reporters that 22 months after the accident, Robert was finally getting better, and it was wrong to let him die.
They want to do something like this suddenly. They don't want to give us time to adjust. They don't want to give him time to do what he can do.
In our special segment 4 tonight, the story of life and death.
And then the sisters landed what appeared to be a knockout blow.
Okay, Robert.
A videotape made by Robert's therapists, without Rose's knowledge, was aired on local television and suggested Robert was making real progress.
Okay, Robert, grab the cup.
Robert grabbing a cup.
There you go. The red
Distinguishing
peg,
between colors.
grab the red peg. Good. Excellent.
Wiping his mouth with a towel.
Here, wipe your mouth.
And grasping a bean bag.
Grab this bean bag, Robert. Right here. It's a blue bag. Good.
It seemed to be compelling evidence that Robert, regardless of what the doctors and his wife were saying, was improving.
The effect of that tape is very clear. It looks as though he understands commands. He can tell the difference between colors. That he is there. Maybe in a diminished capacity, but he's there.
But we know better. I know that it's been over a year later, and he can't even do the same things that he did back then.
Rose says, watch the portions of the videotape not aired on TV. Portions, she says, show all the times Robert was unable to respond.
Grab the ball, Robert. Grab the ball. Here, Robert. Grab the ball.
No matter how long it took.
Here's a cup and the spoon. Take the spoon, Robert. Take the spoon.
Robert. 10 seconds.
Robert. Cup and a spoon.
20
Take the
seconds.
spoon. Robert, take the spoon.
30 seconds.
Let's just see what he does.
40 seconds.
Okay, that's all right.
And he still didn't get it right. Look at how much help Robert needed to accomplish the smallest tasks.
Right here, Robert. Hand it to me. Reach. Reach. Oh, you don't want to hand it to me. Here.
And how little of what he was doing he actually understood.
Touch your nose, Robert.
If you ask me, did he with help, did he grab it? Yeah, he did. Does he know what he's doing? I don't think so.
You say that the videotape shows that he can understand.
Oh, yes. When you tell him simple verbal commands, he will follow through. He can think and follow through with it physically.
More than a year and a half after the videotape was made, Robert's fate is still embroiled in a swirl of legal maneuvering. Doctors, lawyers, judges, and therapists all have opinions on what would be best for Robert. The only one who can't voice his opinion is Robert.
Can Robert in any way tell you what he wants?
No.
Can he tell you, I want to die now?
No.
Do you ever ask him?
I've asked him, Robert, show me a sign that you're there. Blink twice, or move your hand, or do this, or show me that you're there. Show me some kind of sign that you're there. And there's nothing.
No response.
No response.
Not a blink.
Not a blink. Nothing.
But Florence, Rebecca, and Deborah tell a different story. They say that Robert's mood brightens when he sees them, an indication of his will to live.
All of a sudden, he just picked my hand up like this and put it like that. I says, Robert, I says, do you realize what you've done? And he picked it up and done it again. I says, Robert, I says, you kissed my hand.
Do you have any doubts that he wants to live?
I have no doubts whatsoever.
Now, what makes you so sure that he wants to die?
If you knew Robert, you know how strong he was. He always wanted to be the provider, you know, and the strong one, and take care of us, and be a husband, be a father. And if he can't do any of those things, you know, he didn't see any point, you know, and just being, existing.
His sisters say if you knew Robert, you'd know he was a fighter. He was stubborn. He was strong. He wouldn't give up no matter what.
I don't know what to say about that, because he really didn't have too much, you know, he didn't discuss many things with his sisters. They weren't very close. They don't even know him.
In fact, Rose says, Robert deliberately had not seen or spoken to his mother and sisters for 5 years prior to his accident, that his children barely know their grandmother or aunts. Robert's brother Michael concurs.
He wouldn't even talk to him. So there was no communication there at all.
While Florence and the sisters say they had seen Robert within the last 5 years, none of the family members wanted to say what happened to sever ties. But Rose and Michael maintained that they know best what Robert wanted, because he told them only a week before the accident he would not want to be kept alive in a situation like this.
He had been drinking the night before, and I says, Robert, one of these days I'm going to get a call that you either been in an accident, you got killed, or you killed someone, or I says, you're going to be maimed for the rest of your life laying in a hospital bed, you know. And he says, Mike, if that ever happens, just promise me that you won't let that happen.
What were his exact words?
Mike, don't let them do this to me.
Rose says she heard Michael's discussion with Robert.
And this isn't just a story that you've made up. He actually said this.
Yeah, in front of his 2 children and myself and Mike.
Very clear in your
Very
mind
clear.
that he does not want to live.
Rose says that even though she barely makes ends meet on the $24,000 a year she makes providing daycare, she rejects suggestions by the sister's lawyer that a $165,000 life insurance policy on Robert is in any way influencing her decision. No one, not even the doctors hired by the opposing sides of the family, can say for certain what patients like Robert are thinking, and they disagree what should be done. Dr. Vincent Fortunes was hired by Florence and Robert's sisters.
We always have to be guided by the principle of do no harm, or in Latin we say primum non nocere, do no harm. And by turning off food and fluid on an individual like this, we would definitely be doing harm.
Dr. Ronald Cranford was hired by Rose for his opinion.
It's the quality of life that counts, not preservation of life. To be severely brain damaged and aware of your condition is worse, far worse, than being in a vegetative state.
If Robert's feeding tube is withdrawn, he will die within 10 to 30 days. It is possible, trapped inside his mind, Robert understands this. Behind these eyes, does Robert fear death, or does he long for it?
He's in a hell that he can never get out of. How would you feel being shut in a cage, screaming for help, and there's no one to answer?
Rose says she can live with the decision to let Robert die. It's the decision to keep him alive that haunts her.
I feel no guilt at all to allow Robert to have his wish. In fact, that's the only gift I'll ever give Robert. That's all I can give him.
No trial date has yet been set for the court case that will eventually decide whether Robert Wendland lives or dies. The case is believed to be the first of its kind in California, and as such, there's no clear legal precedent. Experts say the judge's decision will be guided by 3...
They had to be cut off because of the YouTuber, but Why should a court decide whether he lives or dies? That's like, it's like send someone to death. I mean, the death penalty. Crazy? Decided to cut off the feed, dude. That loco. That's all. That's my take. Coming up next, these women say they've been sexually harassed by supervisors at a car company. The harassers say they're all lying. She's a flirt. The spokesman for the car company says she doesn't want to see that videotape. But there are multiple sides to this story, and you're going to hear videotape. And you're going to hear videotape of a sex porn that has never been seen before on television. It's an all-out sexual harassment story that I've seen and you don't want to miss. Stay with us. Here's a question for you. Where do you draw the line at work between innocent fun, flirtation, and sexual harassment? It's a hot topic like education these days. And the sexual harassment was so vagrant and so belligerent, I can't tell you about it in full length. It's a story about people who have been sexually harassed at a car company with a videotape that should never have been published or seen. Here's Chris Hansen.
They took away my life. That's how I feel about it.
This woman says her life has been a living hell.
Every day I was scared.
She was afraid to even leave the house.
I didn't want to be seen with my husband because I was embarrassed. And not because he was my husband, but because I didn't want these people to see my husband and tell him what happened in there.
What happened, she says, was unrelenting sexual harassment on the job. Everything from degrading graffiti to sex parties condoned by company managers and union officials alike. And what's surprising, what she calls her hell on earth was no sweatshop, no isolated small-time operation.
Ford. Quality is job one.
It was at Ford Motor Company, one of the most prestigious names in corporate America. One that seems proud of its record of hiring women, of its sensitivity to women's issues. Every year, Ford's 58 American factories help produce more than 6 million cars and trucks. With revenue of more than $150 billion, it's one of the largest corporations in the world. But beneath the shiny image lie some disturbing allegations. Hardcore harassment at two of Ford's massive factories in Chicago.
I went to Ford to better myself.
55-year-old Juanita Rivera grew up on a farm, one of 6 children in a Mexican-American family. In the early 1970s, she thought she had realized her American dream when she landed a high-paying Ford factory job. But Rivera says her dream disintegrated into a nightmare of sexual abuse.
It was vulgar language. Any name in the book was every day.
Her stories are explicit, filthy language, crude advances. She says it was continuous from the very beginning by both workers and more often bosses. Once she says her supervisor even used a rubber hose, rubbing it against her to simulate a sex act.
He put it between his legs and he was running around and asking me, and how do you like this? Would you like this?
And this is a boss.
The boss.
And the boss's boss was watching as well.
Yes.
And Rivera says it didn't stop there. That over a period of several years, 4 of her bosses groped her body literally hundreds of times. She says they continuously used threats to force her to have sex with them. And she admits she gave in to 2 of them.
And I was told that if I didn't do what they want, I could lose my job.
Rivera finally quit in 1993 after what she calls her most humiliating moment, when she confided to a supervisor that she needed time off for a hysterectomy. Rivera says men at Ford soon started making crass and offensive comments.
They said, why was it rotten?
Did you ever approach the supervisor and say, hey, wait a minute, this was something very private. This was something only you were supposed to know and the plant doctor was supposed to know?
Yes, I did.
And what did he tell you?
He laughed about it.
Rivera is not alone. Dateline talked to most of the 33 women from the 2 Chicago plants who have filed harassment complaints against Ford with the federal government. In all, more than 600 women work in these plants. They're outnumbered by men 7 to 1. And many women say that at a company where the slogan is "Quality is job one," the harassment began on day 1.
They walk us through the plant on orientation day. First thing, woo-wee, fresh meat.
Lisa Rapier's introduction to Ford factory life was 7 years ago.
Looking at your butt. Nice butt.
This is on your first day.
Oh yeah, first day. Didn't want to come back, but where was I going to go? $14.75 an hour? I wasn't going nowhere.
And that's exactly why these other women say they put up with it. Like Rapier, many are single mothers who need that Ford paycheck, which averages more than $22 an hour. It wouldn't be so bad, these women say, if it was just the occasional dirty joke, unwanted compliment, or even an invitation for drinks. But Roz Warnell says the explicit pressure from her boss was so far over the line, we can't even broadcast what she claims he said.
He would tell me things like he wanted to me. He says on several occasions that he wanted to my.
This is at work.
Work?
Yes.
A superior is saying this.
Yes.
Jody Ferris says another top manager at the same plant was equally offensive.
He was, kept asking me a lot of personal questions. Have I been sexually satisfied by an older man? And was I ever satisfied by any of my last boyfriends? And he had made comments that, how well endowed he was and how he's left all his women satisfied.
And even though she says she turned down his advances, Ferris says the rumor soon spread that she was sleeping with the boss.
He had told a bunch of his other salary peers that that's mine. Leave
That's
her
mine?
alone. That I was
Talking
his.
about you.
Yes.
That you were his property.
Yes.
They want to know how it tastes. They want to know how it feels. They want to know when can they get it.
Suzette Wright, another single mother who depended on her Ford job, says filthy come-ons are as common as punching the clock. And they think this is okay to say this?
They think that it's absolutely okay.
How often are these graphic comments made?
Every day. Every day.
Wright says the harassment got so bad that she was hospitalized for depression.
And I sat in the hospital thinking, it must be just me. Until I looked up one day, and a girl from my plant walked in the room and sat down. And we looked at each other and couldn't believe it.
As it turned out, Wright was just one of several Ford women who sought psychological help to deal with their pain. Many are now on medical leave from Ford. What kinds of things so upset these women? There was obscene graffiti written on bathroom walls, mentioning specific Ford women by name, and pornography openly displayed in the factory. And women say there were condoms stuffed into toolboxes, dirty tampons hung up on the factory floor, and worst of all, men masturbating on the factory floor right in front of female workers.
What the women at Ford Motor Company have suffered goes beyond sexual harassment.
Lorna Brett is head of the Chicago chapter of the National Organization for Women, which is supporting 33 women who have filed complaints against Ford with the government.
What Ford Motor Company has created, or let it be created, is a prison-like atmosphere where women go in and everyone needs a protector. And that protector is going to ask favors from you. And that's just the way it is. It's quid pro quo. It's like a prison.
The women say they were harassed by some 30 different men at the 2 Chicago Ford plants. Far from isolated, they say the abuse has been widespread and systematic. How could this go on in manufacturing facilities owned by one of the biggest, most respected corporations in the world today?
Because they allow it.
The women say they took their complaints to the highest levels of the factory, but concede they don't know how much Ford headquarters knew of the problem. But regardless of who knew what, the women say a good old boy culture in the factories has flourished.
They got that old mentality thinking in the 50s and the 60s.
Were you at all flattered by this attention?
No, I couldn't say I was flattered.
How did it make you feel?
Degraded, humiliated, because that's not what I came there for. I came there to make a living.
Women say the harassment has been going on since the 1970s, when the factories first began hiring them. They say the problem has continued in part because they were threatened by their harasser.
He had told me before, don't never say anything, I'll deny everything, I'll have your job.
He's told me on several occasions that if I ever repeated this, that he would do something to me, as in bodily harm, and he would also make sure that I'm terminated.
But mostly women say it was the Ford factory culture at these plants that encouraged the harassment. A culture where men made their own rules. Women say this culture didn't just tolerate harassment, it celebrated it. You may be shocked to see the sex parties men from one Ford factory actually videotaped. Parties that were advertised on Ford bulletin board. And when women tried to stop harassment in the factory, they say Ford simply ignored them. How many of you have complained to Ford about it?
All of us.
When we come back, I can't even speak. When we come back, more sides of the story and an explicit videotape. I gotta warn you, I gotta start ASJ restrictions on this channel, on these episodes. Oh God, I don't even want to talk. Stay with us. Oh God. This is... Every time I hear stories about sexual harassment, I'm in a workplace, and I was never sexually harassed, thank God. But if I was a part of sexual harassment, I'd want to move out of the country, for real. But that's not in this case. These women came forward to say that Ford headquarters men sexually harasses young women. Now they left. But there's more to the story. Chris?
When they took a job at Ford Motor Company, women in Chicago believed their factory bosses wouldn't tolerate sexual harassment of any sort. After all, it's against Ford's corporate policy. But these women say that policy against harassment didn't seem to matter. How many of you have complained to Ford about it?
All of us.
And how many of you have gotten any satisfaction from the company?
None of us.
What Roz Warnell says she got instead was a profane tongue lashing.
And he told me to do my job, that I made at the time it was like $17 an hour, and to shut the up.
Tracy Graham says that when she blew the whistle on a supervisor, the manager who responded was himself accused of sexual harassment by 8 different women.
He's not going to do any good. They're all working together. They're not looking out for me, they're looking out for each other.
But perhaps no one feels these women's pain as much as Joyce McCain. McCain worked her way up from the factory floor to become a supervisor, and she does her best not to forget the women she left behind. But she says Ford sometimes makes it impossible.
Any complaint that I have ever went to with them gets unanswered or gets thrown back to me.
And you're a supervisor at this plant.
I am a supervisor at this plant.
Can't you march in there and say, hey, look?
I have done that.
And what do they say?
They put you on hold, they get back to you, and then the next thing you know, it's a week, a month. Forgotten.
How far up the Ford chain of command did these complaints go? We don't know because Ford won't say. Many women tell us they tried to tell top officials at Ford Chicago factories but got nowhere. They blame the culture at the factories where they work, where they say men brought demeaning and insulting materials into the workplace. Pictures of events like this. A sex party held by Ford workers that was videotaped. Dateline obtained a copy of the tape, which women say graphically shows the mindset of some men in the Chicago plant. It looks like a bawdy bachelor party, but it's how some Ford workers celebrate Christmas. Complete with strippers. Some of it is so offensive, we can't even show it to you. The headline attraction, a raffle.
Anybody got that number?
The prize, workers say, sex with a prostitute. Several workers told Dateline that these parties are a decade-old tradition, and not just at Christmas, but also at Father's Day and Valentine's Day. Ford says this particular videotape may be 10 years old, but admits these sex parties continued up until just a few months ago, and that Ford workers and sometimes even supervisors have attended them. The parties were at night at motels around town away from the factory, but workers say graphic invitations were put on Ford bulletin boards with tickets sold openly on the plant floor. Ford employees even took pictures. Insiders say the X-rated shots were passed openly around the factory floor in front of female workers. Maybe you're thinking it's their private business if men hold sex parties after hours. But legal experts tell us that if supervisors are present, if photos from the parties are passed around the plant, or if the parties are advertised on company property, it could all add up to a hostile work environment in violation of federal laws on sexual harassment. And that's exactly the kind of environment many female workers have described to the National Organization for Women.
It's like the Wild Wild West in these plants. There are no rules. It's whatever you want. Just take it.
Lorna Brett says Ford has fostered a hostile work environment by ignoring women's complaints and by not punishing harassers even when they are caught.
They just play a chess game with these men. Keep moving them around and keep subjecting more and more women to their unwanted advances.
In the last year and a half, Ford says it has fired 5 employees, including supervisors, because of harassment. But women say there are many more harassers still on the job. Take the case of Jerry Schoonover. He's been accused by 4 different women of harassment, but is still a supervisor. And the foreman, who Lisa Rapier says squeezed her breasts. Johanna Gray says the same supervisor harassed her as well.
And he's still here to do this to other women.
And remember Juanita Rivera, who says a supervisor fondled her, pressured her for sex, and even humiliated her about her hysterectomy? Well, that man is still working at Ford, too, even though he allegedly groped another woman there. He denies being a harasser and says Rivera agreed to have sex with him. Then there's this Ford supervisor who was arrested by police and charged with battery after he allegedly simulated a sex act on a female worker right on the factory floor. Brett Reeds is the woman's lawyer.
He threatened her, straddled her, started, for lack of a better term, humping her or acting out sexual intercourse. While he did that, he taunted her and said, "What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it?"
The supervisor denies that and was acquitted after the judge said he couldn't resolve the conflicting stories, that prosecutors hadn't proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. But earlier this year, after the woman filed suit in civil court, Ford, while admitting no wrongdoing, paid her more than $170,000 to settle the case. The man is still a supervisor at Ford in the very same factory as his alleged victim. And even being convicted of a sex offense hasn't stopped at least one alleged harasser. In 1986, Jerry Smith, a career Ford supervisor, pled guilty to molesting a 10-year-old girl. Officials at the Ford factory not only knew about it, they wrote him recommendations that were used in court to get his sentence reduced. For some companies, knowing about a sex crime might have been a red flag. But Ford kept Smith as a supervisor, even after 7 women at the factory said he went on to sexually harass them. Everything from approaching them with pornography to making lewd comments.
And he told me that I had a pretty pink tongue and asked me if I would stick it out for him again and again and again.
Smith insists that all of these women are lying, though he wouldn't go on camera to talk about it. Smith did tell us that Ford never disciplined him. In fact, he says the company even hired him back as a consultant after he retired, until just a few months ago. How much did Ford headquarters know about the harassment allegations at the Chicago factories? According to legal documents, several officials at Ford's corporate offices in Dearborn, Michigan, apparently knew a lot. As far back as 1994, when 5 women at this factory filed formal harassment complaints with the federal government. Ford headquarters then sent a team of investigators to Chicago. Court records show Ford compiled extensive information about the allegations. taking statements from more than 70 witnesses, including many women who said they were harassed. A female investigator for Ford is even reported to have witnessed some of the harassment herself.
She saw the graffiti. She saw the pornographic pictures. She saw the men step away from the line, look her up and down, lick their lips. She heard the catcalls, the whistles. And she was advised by her escort that they're just checking out the new meat.
The Ford investigator declined to talk to Dateline, but she stated in writing that the harassment charges at just one of the Chicago factories implicated a significant number of plant employees, including management. Nevertheless, women say the harassment continued and in some cases got worse. After the government's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission began investigating, Roz Warnell says that Ford supervisors threatened her and coached her and others on what to say.
They told us not to talk, and if you were picked, that once you got down there, you didn't know anything.
These women thought if all else failed, they could count on their union for protection. But you won't believe where we found some union leaders. And you may be surprised to hear what one of the alleged harassers has to say about his accuser.
She's a big flirt. Very big flirt. I've seen her flirt with a lot of people.
So who's telling the truth here? The conclusion of Chris Hansen's story coming up. Stay with us. Well, we're out of time here. We're going to continue this on the first half tomorrow morning. Now, who's telling the truth here? Whose side? Who do you pick? The women, or the person who's now coming forward telling his side of the story? Who do you believe?
I'm not going to be your meal ticket.
So really, who do you believe? So here's a preview.
This woman is looking for a way out of the company. And I'm not going to be your meal ticket.
Don't miss the conclusion to this story. You may be surprised to hear what this guy has to say, and most of the women to say, even the spokesperson for Ford. That's tomorrow, along with the 1-year anniversary of Oxford on the second half of Give Me a Break Wednesday. That's Give Me a Break for this Tuesday. See you tomorrow morning for the first half and the second half for the special Oxford 1 year later. For all of us here, Give Me a Break on YouTube. Good night, everyone.